Live Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
Welcome to iLive Radio. Hi, I'm ODJ, your host from Amalgamation in Sound. Join me every Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. where I'll bring you the very best in UK soul, house, broken beat, and everything in between. Remember to join in every Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m. for Amalgamation in Sound. See you there.
Hey, what's going on, everybody in cyberspace? This is The Groove Show with your boy, the crowd pleaser, DJ Mark Anthony. Don't forget, each and every Saturday afternoon from 4 to 6 p.m., we want to put you in the mood for whatever the night has in store. I'm playing only the best feel-good, party rocking, body-shaking music from funk to soul to reggae to R&B, house to salsa, and much, much more. We call it The Groove each and every Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. Keep it locked. It's the crowd pleaser, baby. You know how we do. We'll see you on the air. Peace.
The best music around in stereo. Stereo sound.
Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we shall begin.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
Live from the iLive studios in Toronto, Soothe My Soul presents Mars Venus with your host, Patrick O. Morris. Join the conversation now on our Twitter feed at Patrick Morris or in the chat room at www.ilivewebradio.com. And now, here's the man who is helping us find our path between the sexes, Patrick O. Morris.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we're talking a little bit about music, and I sort of cornered a couple of the iLive Radio DJs, and because every time we get together and there seems to be a meeting, we start talking about old school, new school, middle school, all kinds of school, and so I thought it would be kind of cool because for many of you who know, I'm a writer. I have a book out, a book of poetry out. It's called Soothe My Soul. You can pick it up. Shameless plug here. Online at patrickomorris.com, or you can pick it up at Chapters. Pretty much everywhere online. One of the poems that I wrote it's called Musical Segregation. And like radio stations of today, musical segregation sort of fills our hearts. Bored, we switch to stations, trying to find that perfect blend, a perfect mix of music to fill our hearts. But yet we lose the richness and the diversity offered within the isolation of our favorite songs. Hip-hop, classical music, house, reggae, country, rap, gospel. We segregate ourselves along musical lines, trying to find our place in this world. But really, are we better off? Are we better off because we've separated ourselves? And so today we're going to talk a little bit about musical segregation, and I can't help but draw a bit of a parallel between the type of music we listen to and how we live our lives, because music is such a powerful tool that impacts us, resonates through us, literally resonates through us. And so I got a couple guys from the iLive Radio team, and maybe you guys could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the show that you host.
Okay, I guess let's start off with me. Hello, everybody. My name is DJ Ron John. I do the show Colors of Rhythm from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Fridays on iLive Radio. And yeah, been doing it since the inception of the station in terms of the relaunch of it. So pretty much cover music from around the world. So multi-genre, multinational, not like the corporations, but multi-national in terms of countries. Musically is what I play, so that's the focus. So I'm pretty much the show is about the unification of rhythm and music on a certain degree and level. So that's my focus.
All right.
And my name is Jeff Skull. This is the sound of my voice. And if you're just tuning in right now, you missed our show. We are on from Sundays from 12 to 2. And I think that very much like what what Ron mentioned, my partner Gary Taylor and I try to avoid just going into one particular musical box. So, we play a lot of soul, but we also play a lot of pop, some jazz, and we try to keep things eclectic, just because variety is the spice of life, and we don't want to keep it to just one genre.
Gotcha. My son, one of my sons, anyways, he creates music, and he's been doing it for quite a long time. And I remember when he first expressed a desire to create music, the only thing he was listening to was hip hop. And every other kid within his age group, all they were doing was listening to hip hop. And I tried to get him to expand his mind a little bit, saying, you got to listen to a little bit of some classical music. You got to listen to some rock. You got to listen to country. You got to be able to sort of build on your repertoire, because if all you know is hip hop, there's even some stuff within hip hop that you don't even realize, because you come by and you'd be like, oh man, this song is wicked. I'm like, that this is a remix, right? And half the time, this generation, they don't even really know. They don't understand what connects with one another. I remember there was a conversation that we were all talking about one time when we were talking about the connection between jazz and soul and hip hop. Kind of like jazz was the grandfather of hip hop, and soul is the father of hip hop. Maybe you guys could kind of talk a little bit about that, and that connection, because I think a lot of our listeners that are listening, they're listening to their genre of music and don't really understand the connections.
Well, to start off, I think one of the things is that, especially when we're talking about the hip-hop culture, and we're going back, let's say, early 70s onwards to about, I would say, going towards the 90s, in that particular era, is artists were influenced by other forms of music too. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just the genre that they're innovating at the time, but they were also influenced by other forms of music. So that came out in their expression as well. So whether it was disco, whether it was jazz, whether it was, whatever form of music it was, it came out in that form of music. As technology started advancing, now they started expressing it through, taking a sound of that song and turning it into something. So if you listen to the music, especially, like I said, from the 70s going into the 90s, and somewhat to the 2000s too, a lot of the music was based on listening to or an influence of a music, and also, you'd go, for example, most DJs or artist collections would not just have one specific genre of music. It'd be expanded. So you'd have classical albums, you'd have rock albums, you'd have jazz albums, you'd have blues albums, because all of that culminated in everything. I remember when I was at the African Bambaataa and Grandmaster Flash event at Phoenix back in November, and one of the premises that Grandmaster Flash was doing, he says, is this hip hop? Like, the question he was asking, what is hip hop? And he was playing different genres of music. So he threw on everything from AC/DC to, reggae tracks, you name it. He threw it on there just to let everybody know hip hop is an amalgamation of everything, and given out as this particular form. So it is that experience and that knowledge that's there. So that's the important point to be made, is that everything is interconnected, sound and musically. But like it's for somebody to have that influence, and it depends on, like I said, what they've been acculturated to as well.
So do you think that in like today's generation that they're kind of missing out on something, being so tunnel visioned or fixated on a because it's like this is hip hop culture, and this is what it's all about. This is how I'm gonna look. This is how I'm gonna dress, and just kind of live that. Is there anything you think that musically, or even living their life, that they might be missing out on, focusing like that?
I would definitely say so. I came up when I started DJing, was really into hip hop, and then eventually started getting into house music, and both of those forms of music do draw on, the wealth of just the bodies of work that have been created beforehand. There's a strong gospel and disco and, the post-disco influence in house music. But what I kind of found is that by around the mid-90s or so, there were starting to be some producers who I felt like didn't really draw on that tradition. It was like people who grew up just listening to house music, and the stuff that they were making, to me anyways, was a lot less interesting because it didn't really draw on that variety of influences, and it was more tunnel visioned. And I think that you brought up a really good point earlier, which is just because music has gone less from a push, where you would listen to the radio and you would hear a variety of things, where now everybody's got their earbuds in, they're listening to their own collection, and I think that you miss out on a bit, where if you're only listening to the same things over and over, how do you get exposed to new things? So, yeah, I think that it's really important. Comedian Gary Lucy has said that there are like the 4 quadrants of music. You've got stuff that's cool and fun. You've got stuff that's fun but not cool. You've got stuff that's not cool and not fun. And stuff that's, anyways, the 4th one. And then the fifth section is Huey Lewis and the News.
Oh boy.
But, it's like, you have to eat your vegetables. Like, you have to get out there and listen to stuff that will push you out of your comfort zone. And I think that makes you a more well-rounded person.
Both of you guys mentioned the 90s for music. So what happened in the 90s with music?
Very interesting. Just to add on, I grew up in a West Indian household, so my father played many forms of music. So I grew up listening to soca, reggae, country, and then I had my influences that I listened to. So, soul, disco, and then also eventually hip hop. And then I started getting to the jazz more as I got older in the 90s, when I started getting to my early adulthood and into the blues and stuff like that. But going on to what you just mentioned, in the 90s, what really happened is, especially in genre-based music, everything became, how would I say, there's many different forms that came out of it. For example, hip-hop became more multi-genre, sub-genre based. So you have this type of sound, that type of sound. In the house techno realm, you have this type of sound, that type of sound. And then when everybody started bunching it into one form of music, now everybody got confused and said, oh, what is it now? And that sort of, the confusion led to, okay, now when somebody says house, what are you talking about when you say house? House could be this, house could be that. When you say techno, techno could be this, techno could be that. And then everybody started being, there's confusion in the genres of music. And I think that sort of happened when people just say, well, is it good music or is it not good music? Or is what is your taste? The categorization, I think, expansion of it, that happened. And I think that sort of turned its head in the 90s.
I completely agree. And I think that part of what happened, I don't know to what extent this happened with hip-hop, but certainly with house music, is that not only did you have this, all the subcategorizations where, when I started out, it's just like, it's house, where now you would have nights that were just tribal house or just deep tech, or, so it was not merely that, there were different categorizations, but people started to be maybe a little bit less open-minded when it came to what was out there, and only seeking to that particular niche that they were interested in. Where before that, a lot of the clubs that I went to would play, a wide variety of music. So you would have like 20 minutes of hip hop, 20 minutes of reggae, 20 minutes of R&B, 20 minutes of house. And, if you weren't into what was playing at that moment, it was fine, because, half an hour you're going to hear something that you're more into. But it seemed like the whole scene that seemed like it was a lot more unified really started to get splintered.
Do you remember when slow jams used to be at events? You know, like, you know, you'd have your hip hop set, you'd have your house set, you'd have your soca set, you have your reggae set,
Yeah.
and then you have your slow jam set. And I'll tell you something, the slow jam set is what most of us look forward to, because we get to pick the person that we want to be with and dance with them, or quite in a smart way, slow the music down, and people get to go to the bars and buy drinks. So that was what it was back then. You don't see too much of that now in the the clubs now, unless you have a special night for slow jams on Valentine's Day.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I think that a night needs that kind of peaks and valleys. You know, if you're just keeping it at one level, you know, it becomes boring. You know, it's like the loudness wars when it comes to CDs. Like, if everything's cranked up to 11, there's no dynamics. You know, you can't tell that something's loud because nothing's soft. Just to piggyback on your story about the slow jams, my friend Neil Chauhan, maybe I shouldn't have given out his last name, but anyways, shout out to Neil.
It's over, my friend. It's over.
He got tricked at I think this was at government, that by the beginning of the song "Raving I'm Raving," which starts off with that nice Mark Cohn sample, and asked a girl to slow dance, and then the jungle breakbeat came in, and you know, all these couples separated. But it really feels like a whole different scene nowadays.
You know, and I'll also say too, it also creates the mood for the evening too, for the evenings as well. It creates a certain drama. You know what I mean? So that person who has the pressure to get with that person, especially would be the man would try to be pressured to meet that girl, get to talk to them. Right now it's on. It's like, I gotta do something. I gotta, or that other guy who might be interested grabs her before he does. It added a whole different set of drama for the evening. It's
tension
you know
and release.
It was tension release. You know what I mean?
We're gonna take a quick break, but when we come back, I do want to talk a little bit about, because you often hear a lot of singers say, "Oh, I started in church. You know, I started singing in church." And I want to talk a little bit about the impact of gospel music on the wide genre of music for a minute when we come back from this short commercial.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
And we're back. I think we're having way too much fun in the studio here. You were talking about pressure before, so I'm assuming that you were one of those guys who, when the slow jam came on, you were trying to hustle to get to that girl before someone else grabbed her?
Me?
Were you that guy?
I'm speaking off the record. I'm just saying in
Or
general.
you were the DJ watching those other guys?
Or I could be watching a friend do hey, man, I'm just saying what I saw in this particular situation, you know?
Did it happen to a friend of yours, right?
Or happened to somebody.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the impact of gospel, because you know, Beyonce started in church. You know, there are so many different artists that really started. George Michael started in church. You know, and a lot of the soulful sound came out of that, and it impacted music in a big way.
Yeah, well, especially as geez, the cradle. It's interesting. I always think about this. The cradle of music, especially the genres of music that we know around the world, a lot of people follow, comes down to this particular region in the States, which is the Mississippi Delta, and we're talking now about, you know, New Orleans or Louisiana, those areas where, you know, you had gospel choirs and groups, you know what I mean, and the basis of music as it made momentum. So gospel has a huge influence in practically all the genres that are here that we, you know, listen to today. And you'll hear a lot of the artists say that the start was in church. That feeling that emotion that comes through the music, via that, the field spirituals, sung on the plantations, all this stuff that's the backbone of a lot of the genres that's heard today, especially with blues, which of course influenced a lot of the genres of music that we listen to today as well. So that gospel has a huge impact and influence on the music that we listen to.
Yeah, and speaking as a fan of house music, like the whole garage sub scene, I feel is very strongly influenced by gospel. You've got your singers like Michael Watford, producers with like Kerry Chandler, who had a very spiritual and soulful quality to their music. Smack Productions out of New Jersey, and they always had these kind of singers who would belt it out to the rafters. And I feel that Kenny Bobian, like those types of artists, really took that kind of tradition and kept it alive through a new generation in a new form.
So what is it? What is it? Is it about the music? Is it about the environment? Like what is it about? That the gospel thing that really resonates so well.
In essence, it's spiritual. The expressions that's coming out is coming from somebody's soul. When you listen to music, and we will always talk about what makes somebody feel something when they listen to it. What moves, somebody when they listen to music. In the end, it's the soul of what's coming out in that form of music that touches that person. So in essence, the music's spiritual. And whether it's in a church or whether it's sung, at a concert or whatever, that connection. And, we always get into the whole thing about pitch, tone, and all that stuff. You throw it sort of out the window when somebody says, okay, somebody's singing from here. Somebody can sing. I remember Harry Connick Jr. went into this whole explanation of pentatonics on American Idol, and I remember Keith Urban and J-Lo was like, what are you talking about, right? So he went into explanation, given that the fact he's from New Orleans and trained by, Ellis Marsalis and stuff, so he had the knowledge, and he's going to this whole thing. He said, you can sing these notes that are traditionally in the African-American music tradition, but there's a difference in singing it and feeling it, and that essence of what comes out. Because somebody can listen, say, I can listen to such and such artist and mimic, but in the end, what comes out, the feeling of it, because people want to hear that essence of what's coming out in this form of music that they're doing, so.
And you could make the argument that every musical instrument that mankind has come up with is just an attempt to mimic what we're able to do naturally with our own voices. That, when it comes to, that direct, immediate connection, that the voice is really the most immediate. Certainly, great artists and people who have mastered their instruments are able to convey that equally well. Like, thinking about Jimi Hendrix playing his guitar, it's almost like there's a direct connection from his soul through his fingers, through the instrument. But I feel like, voice is, that's how music started, right? Before we had instruments, we were able to sing.
Exactly.
I guess it doesn't hurt either that, if you are growing up in church and you're singing every Sunday, you're in the choir, you're practicing every minute.
That's true, too.
There's a certain level of skillfulness that you'll end up acquiring with that. So what do you guys think about the whole, American Idol? You mentioned that, the whole X Factor and all these shows that are, I don't know if it's so much they're looking for a ready-made singer or, they're just these guys who are looking to be rocketed to be the next Bieber, rocketed out of nowhere.
It's interestingly a catch-22. And what I mean by that is, You know, when you look at the Susan Boyles and you look at the Jennifer Hudsons, here are two people. Okay, Susan Boyle won, right? If I'm correct. But she didn't have the quote-unquote look, quote-unquote. Then you have Jennifer Hudson, who didn't win American Idol, but we can say quite poignantly that she's probably the biggest star that came out of that show, but she didn't win it. You know what I mean? And Grammy Award winner and Oscar winner. You know what I mean? So that's one aspect of it. So yeah, you can package a product and get an artist, and you can make them, you know, this person. But in the end, talent, all right, and the right timing is, because we're dealing with, you know, this industry here. The right timing and the right talent is what pushes an artist through.
Yeah, and you know, Kelly Clarkson, I think she was the first winner of American Idol, went on to have a decent career, but I feel like after that, it's really been the also-rans who have been more successful long term.
Yeah.
Not that, like a Ruben Studdard or somebody like that. Not that he's a household name, but, you know, compared to some of the people that have won, I think that some of the people that weren't as successful were interestingly able to make more of a go out of it.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie Underwood is another really successful winner on American Idol. Like I said, and Fantasia has had a pretty interesting run too. So you had some of them have had this.
So so we look at, you know, things like American Idols and a lot of the corporate side of music has sort of packaged certain things and pushed it. And now you've got things like YouTube, and, you know, almost anybody can put up something, and people are going more along the lines of trying to do for themselves, because the package deal, so to speak, is not, I guess a lot of people are finding that it's not representative of what they want to do specifically. But so it's interesting to me. It kind of seems like music is going through a shift right now.
Yeah.
Away from this, you know, I got a record deal, I'm going to be singing these six albums, but then, you know, the first one comes out, it's not really what I really wanted to do. But it's more along the lines that the agencies are saying, their labels are saying, well, this is what's going to sell. This is what's hot right now. You know, you got to sound like Jay-Z because that's hot right now. Or you got to sound like Drake because that's hot right now. But what do you think about the industry right now in that, I don't know if it's a revival or something's trying to happen?
Well, again, you have two sides of the coin. Now, you have the independent artists, right, who pretty much, with the technology, right, you can pretty much put an album together like this. You don't need to go to big sound studios. You just need a couple programs, you know, your good mixers and somebody with a good ear. Then, from the aspect of putting the product out, back in the day, most of us had to press vinyl, cassette tape, even CDs. Now, you can have something popped up online like this, bang, ready to be downloaded. That's one aspect. The other aspect, too, is now the industry or the record labels, for the most part now, artists have to become their own A&Rs. So basically, you are creating, you know, your form of music and your audience. And once the record labels are looking now at artists who already have an established audience, because of course they don't want to shell out dough, you know, for an artist that they don't know if it's going to sell. But if that artist has groundwork already, they can use that and build on something too. So there is an aspect of that. But like I said, the precarious situation of an artist nowadays is, do I sign or not sign? What are the pitfalls of me getting involved? Or what kind of deal do I want to make with them? So,
No, I was going to hit on the same 2 points, is that, you know, production has been, you know, it's within the hands of anybody. You can, you know, record your bedroom masterpiece, and distribution also is much easier. You know, like look at Bandcamp, for example, where you can, you know, within reason, you can kind of name your price. You've got instant downloads. You don't need to press a physical product. I would say that, yeah, the flip side is exactly what you said, is that the promotion isn't there. So, people need to build up their followings just from a grassroots level. If you look at Radiohead within Rainbows, where they basically said, literally, name your price. Well, that's great if you're already Radiohead. If you've already had, massive success and have a huge following, things are probably a bit tighter for people who are still trying to build up the following and the recognition. But some of my favorite new music, I've just bought a lossless download on Bandcamp, and it's great. You've got instant gratification, and then you can put it on your phone or whatever the case may be.
And I also want to add too, some of the artists as well, to build audience, have to do tours now or do live shows more, just either promote their product in that format or sell their product too if they have something tangible in terms of like a hard copy of something.
Looking at technology and how technology has sort of changed the game in a lot of ways, like you don't even really need to be able to sing these days. You can use auto-tune as from what I hear is a very good tool. So you've got some singers who are using the technology to help them sound better. You've got singers who are using the technology to promote themselves and cut out the labels. And to some degree, the label, I guess, in trying to control or keep their control that they once had, they're a little reluctant to join technology in a way, and they've kind of felt that turn around and kick them a little bit. But as a new artist, somebody who's coming out, who wants to put out an album, who may have worked in their bedroom, and done fabulous recording, they want to put it out. Like, what do you do when it seems so overwhelming because there's so many different things out there, and being able to, back in the day, people would be trying to get that record deal, trying to get signed, and now it's like, it's not so much about that anymore.
It's about it's about the people, like the right business people, the right people you have around you. It all comes down to that. You don't have the good people around you, forget it. Somebody who has knowledge, but I also think mentorship, meeting people who have some knowledge and information that could be shared with, I think helps us a lot too. But I think that comes down to having the right people around you now, because it's really a precarious situation now. A person who wants to get into music now, game's totally changed in that sense.
And when it comes to the major labels, it's kind of interesting that I feel like artistic freedom, like what you mentioned about, okay, Drake's hot right now. We want something that sounds like Drake. I feel like that's a lot more prevalent nowadays, where in the 1970s, the people putting up the money didn't necessarily have an artistic vision. David Geffen, for example, was pretty hands-off when it came to the artistic product. He just would, hire people and trust them to do the music. Where now I feel like it's a lot more hands-on. Things are a lot more homogenized. Like, like especially with this kind of like, synthy pop stuff that's out. Like, is this a Rihanna song? Is it a Nicki Minaj? Like, it's all very homogenized because you've got people really just trying to emulate what has been successful rather than necessarily having any kind of artistic vision.
Well, yeah, when it becomes the cookie cutter, when it says, okay, you know what, this particular sound works, we have to sound like this. So we're going to get, for example, artists going to have an album, okay, we're going to do the album, okay, that's fine, but we have to get this particular X amount of cuts on the album so we can push those units.
But is it about the playability of the song in a way? So if you come up with a song that sort of crosses the genre a little bit, you're not really sure what it is, then you get played on more radio stations maybe?
Well, the weird thing about the recording industry is that, again, timing. They'll have a particular sound and say, this sound works, we're going to go with it. And then, like a curveball comes out. Like I think about Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. right? That sold like, I think 25 million copies. And when that album came out, I knew Alanis Morissette as some dance pop singer from Ottawa, right? But then she signs to Madonna's Maverick label and then drops this album, which culturally, the timing was perfect because right at that time, you know, you had the women's movement at its peak and going into early 90s, and her music fit the time. But it wasn't, when you listen to the music, it wasn't categorized as a typical pop album, because if it was her, right, at the time, the music she was doing, you say, well, hook up with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, hook up with these artists, and come up with this album. No, she's, like I said, Madonna sort of gave her, do your thing, and she did it, and bang, there you go. So it's a really precarious situation, but what happens with these labels is that they have this cookie-cutter mindset, for the most part, and say, this works, let's do it. But then Monkey Wrench comes in and says, okay, then we have to have everybody sound like Alanis now. You know what I mean? So that's an interesting thing how the majors run. So,
You know, definitely agree. It's like with film as well, that nobody really wants to stray too far from the formula. What has been proven to work, which is why you end up with, you know, endless
Terminator 9.
Yeah, endless reboots or sequels to franchises, and you know.
So are we losing creativity here? Is this really what it's boiling down to?
well, you know what? It's interesting. I remember when I was here a couple Fridays ago, and I was, DJ Amber was doing the Rap Salute show, and I was talking to her about one of the artists I like a lot that I've been listening to lately. Doing some digging, because here's the advantage now having stuff online, that you can find out more about artists and you can get references and stuff like that. So now you can say, okay, I can find this artist. So the creativity from a perception in terms of if you're looking at this particular form of music. But when you start expanding and go, okay, I want to find out what more is about. But what happens is a lot of people don't have time to do that. So they say, I'm going to stick to this. Right?
That's when you need to listen to your shows.
Unless they want to find out more about music. Yeah, that's exactly.
No, it's a good point, and I think that it's easy to get caught up in the echo chamber, because you know I'm looking around the room, and you know it's a lot of DJs, but not everybody cares that much, right? Like what music can be just kind of sonic wallpaper to a lot of people, but you're absolutely right that you know, the ability to research and to follow artists is much better now than it's ever been. You know, quick example, there's a guy who just had some songs up on his MySpace. This is going back several years, and really amazing stuff. Like, you know, kind of sounded like D'Angelo, sounded like Lewis Taylor, and you know, eventually he posted up a thing that said, like, check out Emily King. He's now co-writing with her, this guy Jeremy Most, and you know, just looking for more information on people that he's worked with, because he's a really accomplished guitar player. Actually played with Ed Sheeran when Ed was on The Voice. So, you know, you can follow your favorite artists on Twitter. You can, you know, be on their Facebook fan page, but you can also dig a little bit deeper. Like, okay, so this person co-wrote with that person, and he's playing guitar for this person. So that's another example. Like, you know, Emily King, who's got a new album coming out this summer, I'm really looking forward to. But another artist that Jeremy Most played guitar for, Danny Elliott, also just had some stuff on Bandcamp, and because Jeremy Most was credited as a you know, an instrumentalist on there, checked her stuff out. Really great.
So technology's enabled us, I guess, the listeners, to be a little bit more diligent in terms of being able to figure out what we want to listen to. But there's so much noise that's pushed to the listener. So much noise. And the reality is that I think there's a lot of people out there who are kind of like, I need somebody to tell me what to listen to, as opposed to taking the time to do some digging for myself to figure out, you know, what I really like. You know, I hear a beat, oh, that beat's great, but that's about it. Like, for the average person, you know, what do you say to that? Like,
It's a strange thing because, you know, another aspect that I look into is cultural phenomenons of particular artists. And one of the movies I've seen, and I highly recommend if everybody's seeing, is In Search of Sugar Man, which is about Sixto Rodriguez and his, situation with the Sussex label, which Clarence Avant, who runs or was involved with Motown, but also was involved in Taboo. So those great records from Alexander O'Neill down to Sherelle and SOS Band. He put this album on. He put all his faith in the record, and it didn't sell a lick in the States. And he was a brilliant songwriter, and didn't get the attention that he got there. But over in South Africa, there was a big movement behind his music, and also not just socially but politically moved the country in a certain direction. And you're wondering, how did somebody from Detroit all of a sudden have huge influence in South Africa? These phenomena are interesting. So you're right. It all depends on timing. It all depends on placement. And in some certain societies, when there's nothing, for example, right now, let's say in North America, if somebody doesn't have a reason to listen to something or gravity towards something, they're not going to go for it. For example, you do have what's going on in the States with the cops and everything like that, right? If there are artists who grasp that now and say, okay, I'm going to put out a project that fits the time, but it's the expression of the people. People want to feel, right, that they're being heard.
You get a Marvin Gaye.
Right? So you get what's going on when, geez, Barry, some people would know, but Berry Gordy actually didn't like the album. You know what I mean? Russell Simmons didn't like some of the stuff Public Enemy was doing. But it had a time and a place. And some people, like I said, again, the vision of what you think of what's going to hit. Sometimes the social timing of the record that comes out is a big thing too.
No, that's huge, and look no further than not to continuously bring it back to D'Angelo, but Black Messiah was really released when it was because of the whole Ferguson thing, and as much as I'm one to say it's a bit creatively bankrupt to just look at what other people are doing and look at what's successful. And try to emulate that. I certainly hope that Black Messiah has a big influence on what's going on in modern R&B, because and not at all to make it a racial thing, but when artists like Mayer Hawthorne or Justin Timberlake are, in terms of what's going on in the mainstream, more true to what soul means to R&B than a lot of the successful African American artists. Like that's a pretty sad situation.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Also thinking about Mavis, the movie Mavis, another doc I got to see during the Hot Docs Festival, and basically broke down pop staples and his motivation behind what they were doing musically. Remember, a lot of people may not know, but gospel music basically stuck mostly to, the spirituals and the type of stuff that's related to, Bible-based songs. But pops really took a hold on to the whole social movement that was going on in the States. And he was really a big admirer of Dr. Martin Luther King. So you heard a lot of that expressed in the music, and they were able to reach to a broader audience. The theme was still the same, but it was now about social and about humanity, and that connected. So it's a catch-22 when you're living in a particular part of the world, and for some people, they don't have that. Some people have a certain relation to certain things, but then they don't have that situation where saying, hey, wait a second, I have to find out what this artist is doing. It's timing and social things,
Which kind of brings to mind a thought, something that we were talking a little bit earlier about before the show started, which is, some artists, they come out and they're a firecracker, and then you get artists that are like light bulbs. They just don't seem to die. They don't seem to go away. And even after they die, their music is still resonating across generational lines.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, how do you even, bottle that? Or even figure out how to bottle that?
It's funny because, when you contacted me earlier this week, and I was thinking about some of the artists, and I started thinking about people like Stevie, Michael, Bob Marley, and the themes that they've come, because remember, this is not just, in some cases it could be one album, but in other cases the body of work, and then what they're doing musically with what they're doing that transcends generations. So, geez, my nephews who were in their early 20s, my little niece, they know who Michael Jackson is. They know his moves, they know his songs. Yeah. You know what I mean? And there's certain artists, Stevie Wonder. I know when Stevie was making his greatest musical output in the 70s, I was a kid, but I was listening, I heard his music. And as time went on, even though I knew some of his pop stuff in the 80s, I of course, heard that more because I was at that particular era in time. But I knew of his earlier stuff. And then I got to grow an appreciation more of it as time went on. So people who have those influences, they'll say, okay, I've heard that out, and I'd say, oh, wow, this is magnificent. You know what I mean? Bob Marley, I grew up listening to Bob Marley, but didn't know the cultural significance until I gained more of age and realized, wow. And then you realize this transcends a particular period of time. This is something that's, lasts forever. You know what I mean? And there is an instinct difference in that sense. You know what I mean? They not just the sound may have the time frame of when the song was put out, but when you play the song and everybody gets a feeling, for example, you could throw Billie Jean on, for example, and people just know right away. I'm in it for the most part, unless somebody really doesn't like Michael, and that's another thing altogether, right?
So yeah, it's been said that the light that burns twice as bright burns half as long. I think one of the other aspects is, that a lot of creative types are kind of miserable, and certain people once they achieve a level of success, they're no longer driven by the same hunger that they had before they did that. So I can't think of any good examples off the top of my head, but I think that it probably does take a toll on people to be creative. I don't know. I'm not creative at all myself, so I don't need to worry about that. But it does seem like a lot of great art is fueled by deep unhappiness. I wonder to what extent that takes a toll on people.
I agree. I think it's moods. I do have a musical background, so I would say that a lot of the music I had done or put together had a mix of everything. Mm-hmm. Whatever emotion I was in, it came out in that form. You know what I mean? So yeah, to your point, whatever mood that artist is in, that inspires them to do it. Mm-hmm. And I think I use the term channeling. You're channeling your energy into that instead of doing something else with that anger or that.
You look at an artist like Sade,
yeah,
who's like, every 10 years or something, she comes out with a new album.
Mm-hmm.
Comes out with a new album, and it's like number one. It's huge.
Yeah.
10 years later. When you look at a lot of the artists that are out there right now, if a few years goes by and they don't put out an album and they put one out, then it's a comeback.
Yeah.
You hear that kind of terminology being used. What's the difference between an artist like Sade to be able to be out of the game seemingly for 10 years, have an album that sells, for those 10 years, and then comes back, put something, and then be a number one, and then you have, an artist like Mariah, who I think it was like 4 or 5 years went by before she put out an album. She put an album out, and then we were like, oh, it's her big comeback. How is that? What's the difference?
That's a good question because, we're not going to doubt Mariah's singing vocal skills. We're not going to doubt that. So what is it? Is it the marketability of her? I don't know. Sade has pretty much been Sade since day one. She never, if you know what I'm saying,
yeah.
She hasn't really changed what she's doing, and she's built and it's based on a body of work. Mariah evolved over the years, you know what I mean, in terms of her music, in terms of how she was putting her music together, how it was produced and stuff like that, right? She still had the same voice, right? So I'm not sure if they're coming from that perspective, if it was her comeback, right? But if you look at a lot of the singers nowadays, she could probably blow out a good ton of them. But it's just the idea, well, okay, how is she measured up against Taylor Swift, for example, and this and that artist? Is that what they're trying to say? That's something that I don't, the comeback album, is it?
Yeah, and you could make the argument that in terms of like kind of pop R&B, that type of vocal styling, that maybe somebody like an Ariana Grande has taken that spot in the public eye, where maybe an artist like a Sade or like Rick James was famously doing albums that people didn't really know about, but grown-ups knew about them. Like people maybe with a little bit more, I was going to say mature taste, but people who know what they like, people who don't need to be force-fed by the media, I think tend to be more loyal when it comes to, there's a new album coming out by somebody that I admire, and will tend to support that person, whereas, flavor of the month, pop type of stuff, maybe the fandom isn't there, people, the life cycle for, an artist's popularity is a lot shorter.
You mentioned the life cycle. Do you think that our attention span has gotten so short that to make it in the game, you have to, like, every year, 6 months, it's like a new Apple toy you got to put out?
It's again a strange beast, when things are going back to the singles EP market now, and also speaking as a DJ, I mean, in some cases, there's some places where I could say, okay, I could play a genre of music for an extended period of time, but then in some places where I play, I would say I may have to play only 3 songs and skip to the next one and go back and forth, because for some people's attention span, it's that quick. It's like in and out, so it's, again, that comes down to your view in the room and seeing what people are, what's going on. That's one of the aspects of being a DJ, and it's interesting. I want to get into this now. Is that people just think it's you just throw up and play music
play
like
songs,
your jukebox. Your jukebox.
Yeah,
People come up and tell you,
jukebox.
can you so you've I know you may have had this happen to your you're playing a certain genre of music, and all of a sudden somebody says, "Can you play such and such and such?" And I'm like, "That's not that kind of night. I don't just put up music just to play like that." And people have this notion.
So you're saying you don't take requests? Is that what you're saying?
If I take,
because there are some DJs who are like, I don't do requests.
I do requests if it's within the genre that I'm playing. Then I'll have an open ear. But I'm not hearing it if you're asking me to throw the monkey wrench in the machine that's running. And especially if the venue who hired me to do this, the event, I'm not going to go against their wishes. So I'm going to do what I do. If you don't like it, you can complain to them, or you can go, or you can leave. You know what I mean? But I think some people have this idea that this me first. And there's some people, like I said, there'll be people dancing in a room. And I've actually been in a place where people are dancing in a room, and they're loving the music, and that one person says, "Why aren't they playing this? And they'll want to go ask them, I go, do you look in the room and see everybody dancing?
Still haven't played my song yet.
That person's ego hasn't been satisfied. You're looking at the vibe. Like I remember back in the day, I would go to certain spots, and I may not like what the DJ's playing, but I'm not going to go to DJ booth and tell them, I don't like such and such shit playing this and that. Come on, man. Make so their livelihood. This is what they're doing. Yeah, so it just makes me laugh sometimes when people have this idea, and that's the problem nowadays. People have such a short attention span, they don't want to actually sit and listen to what the music. They want pop radio 24/7. Some people, they want that every second. I'm like, you don't want to go on and find out something new. It baffles me. I'm just saying that. That's my rant. Sorry about that.
So do you take requests?
Once again, within the parameters. If it's something that I wanted to play anyways. And it's interesting. Like you talk about the shortened attention span, or the shortened life cycle. We're almost getting back to the way the music industry was in the '60s, where it's more singles based. And when you look at, say, a group like the Beatles, everything that they accomplished, 13 albums, and an EP, they did that in like 7 years, you know, so that's literally like a masterpiece every 6 months. And I don't think that most people have that in them. But I think you're right. Like the life cycle is getting shorter. You know, the industry demands product on a regular basis. Otherwise, they'll forget about you.
So there was a time wherein the record industry kind of dictated what was going on, what was the next trend, what things were going to look like. And from what you're saying, technology in a way is is pushing things back to into the hands of the consumer.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Happy birthday, Prince, because I want to make a Prince reference here.
Oh yeah, there's a Prince show going on tonight. Apparently,
yes. Agape
Cesario,
181,
that picture you put on Facebook, I don't know.
Yeah,
man.
Agape 181. I think it's from 5 to 9 tonight. Am I
Yeah.
correct? 5 to 9.
Something like that, yeah.
All Prince and Minneapolis influenced stuff. But anyways, I want to go back to the point that Prince had that issue with Warner when Prince wanted to put out an album like, every 6 months or something like that, or every year. And the label saying, no, we're not going to do that. Remember back in the day, the label said, no, we have to give some time for you before you put it. He's like, no, I want to put out my stuff. And then he put all the slave stuff on his face and all that stuff. So it's interesting how now we've gone from that stage to now everything has to come out like this, quick. So everything
He was ahead of his time, I
everything
guess.
changes in time, you know what I mean, with technology and all that stuff, yeah.
Wow. It's been a treat having you guys on the show with me talking about this whole music thing. It is definitely interesting how, and I watched my son Nate Smith, super producer, as he calls himself. Shameless plug for my son. I watch him as he works with artists and he records them and all that. And I've watched from he was about 8 years old. He discovered GarageBand. And that's where he found his love of music. And I've watched him really stick to his craft, and the benefits are showing today. But the big thing I think what a lot of people miss, and that I had to talk to him at a young age, was the diversity. You know, understand that there is a link between all forms of music, and you know we talked a lot about how do we. You know, how do you be that light bulb versus the firecracker, and you know, go back to the emotion, the feeling. You talked about the gospel artist and the impact, and a lot of the impact was the emotion, that feeling, and that's what resonated. And we all know songs that we hear that has the ability to just transport us right back to that moment and time, and we feel that emotion, no matter how horrible or how wonderful it is. You know, it's a trigger that those complex chemical reactions that happen within our brains transports us right. It's like a time machine.
Yeah.
You know, and being able to put yourself into your music, and even being able to take the time to what's the type of music that I'm going to listen to is about. Because I think a lot of times it's very mindless nowadays. It's just it's a nice beat, but then you listen to the words. And I've had these conversations with my sons all the time. I'm like, okay, if you take out all the swearing, what's the person actually saying? And you find that what they're saying really makes no sense at all.
Yeah.
You know, so I think as we as consumers, when we start looking at what represents us from a musical standpoint, whether it's gospel or hip hop, house, reggae, whatever it is that you're going to define yourself with, we need to understand that there is an interconnect, and we have to do our due diligence. I mean, when you guys put your shows together and you have to pick out what songs you're going to play, you got to spend a little time to stop and figure out how things link together. Some of the things you were playing earlier, I'm listening to some of the gospel and some of the soul and everything that was kind of intertwined, and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. I've never heard that song before, but it mixed right in with everything. Like you may say you don't have a creative bone in your body, but you're very creative, my friend.
Thank you.
I totally
kind
agree.
to say so.
I totally agree.
I want to thank you guys for being on the show. When's your shows again? Yeah, I know you're just before me.
Right. So Always Digging with myself and Gary Taylor. Every week we take 2 hours and explore a theme, and that's from 12 to 2 every Sunday afternoon.
And me, every Friday, Colors of Rhythm, every Friday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on iLive Radio. And I want to do a big plug because we're going to be live to air from Kensington Lodge, 21 Kensington Avenue. That's in the heart of Kensington Market next Friday. And I'm also going to be doing my So Funky event right after that. But from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., we're going to be live from Kensington Lodge this Friday coming up. And
tune in next week. We're going to get back to the Mars Venus thing. We're going to talk a little bit about online dating and what technology is doing with
shout out to
between
Tinder.
the sexes. So if you're listening and you've done the online dating thing, good, bad, ugly, whatever your experiences are, please, I want to hear from you next week on the show as we talk about that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Best internet radio station around. iLive Radio, the new social network. Music back to back to back. iLive Radio. Rare groove, revival, slow jams, upfront, old school. The internet's #1 on the World Wide Web. iLive Radio.
You're listening to iLive Radio, changing the way you listen to radio. iLive Radio.
Welcome to iLive Radio. Hi, I'm ODJ, your host from Amalgamation in Sound. Join me every Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. where I'll bring you the very best